Hi, and welcome to the Heathen Trans Girl podcast with me, your host, Kaya Faulkes. Today's episode is about Njord, the Vanir god and father of Freyr and Freya, who rules the course of the wind, stills the seas and fire, on whom men call for voyages and for hunting. Njord, who is so prosperous and abounding in wealth that he may give a great plenty of lands or gear, and on whom shall men invoke for such things. As a god of prosperity and wealth who is associated with the sea, I recently said a little prayer to Njord when my father told me that he was going out on a fishing trip with one of his buddies. And so I said a prayer to Njord that my father would have a great fishing trip. And when he called me later, he said it was the most and biggest fish he had ever caught. And that made me smile. Now, Njord isn't necessarily a part of my hearth cult or personal pantheon, but as the father of Freya, and since I work down on a wharf right next to the sea, I definitely have a little bit of an affinity for him. In our last episode about Skadi, definitely talked about Njord quite a bit, as he was at one point married to Skadi. So I figured this would be a natural follow-up to that episode. Now, this episode, as one of my lore episodes, is mainly going to focus on reading through the primary attestations of Njord, as they exist in the Poetic Edda, Prose Edda, and Heimskringla. I wanted to give a huge thanks to Alison Finlay for giving their permission for me to read the Finlay and Faulkes translation of the Heimskringla. So thank you very much for that. That is the 2011 edition. I will also be reading from the Poetic Edda, Henry Adams' Bellows translation from 1936, and the Prose Edda, the Arthur Gilchrist Brodeur translation from 1916. And both of those Eddas are public domain, so I can read them to you in a little bit more of their fullness. We have a boatload of attestations to read through today, I think 21 in total, only 4 of which repeat from the Skadi episode. And I have tried to organize them in a semi-chronological order, putting some at the beginning that have a little more backstory to them. In the middle section, we have some more kennings and stuff. And at the very end, we have an example of ritual given to Njord in some of the sources. So without further ado, let's get started. As Njord is a Vanir, I thought it would be proper to start in Heimskringla, which is a euhemerized book, meaning the deities are presented as human, but it does give a description of the land of the Vanir. So I thought that would be interesting to start with the location and then proceed from there. So first attestation is from Ynglinga Saga, chapter 1 in the Heimskringla, the Finlay and Faulkes translation. From the north, from the mountains that are beyond all habitations, flows a river through Svithjord that is properly called Tanais, or the River Dawn. It was formerly called Tanakvisal, Fork of the Dawn, or Vanakvisal, Fork of the Vanir. It reaches the sea in Svartahav, the Black Sea. The land within Vanakvislir, the delta of the Dawn, was then called Vanaland, land of the Vanir, or Vanaheim, world of the Vanir. This river separates the thirds of the world. The region to the east is called Asia, that to the west, Europe. I thought this passage was particularly interesting because the River Dawn and the Black Sea are both locations that you can find on a map. So it puts it into this world where the land of the Vanir might actually be pretty nicely. So I thought you might enjoy that. Next, we have an extended version of a passage from the Skadi episode, Ynglinga Saga, Chapter 4, from Heimskringla, Finlay, and Faulkes. Odin went with an army against the Vanir, but they put up a good fight and defended their land, and victory went alternately to both sides. But when both sides grew weary of this, they arranged a meeting of reconciliation between them and made peace and gave each other hostages. The Vanir put forth their noblest men, Njord the wealthy and his son Freyr, and the Æsir in turn, the one called Honir, and they claimed that he was very suitable to be a ruler. I will skip this middle section here, the story of Mimir's head, and start again. Njord and Freyr Odin appointed as sacrificial priests, and they were gods among the Æsir. Njord's daughter was Freyja. She was a sacrificial priestess. She was the first to teach the Æsir black magic, which was customary among the Vanir. When Njord was among the Vanir, he had been married to his sister, for that was the law there. Their children were Freyr and Freyja, but it was forbidden among the Æsir to cohabit with such close kin. The next passage comes from Ynglinga Saga, Chapter 5 of Heimskringla, Finlay, and Faulkes translation, in which Odin goes seeking new lands for his kin in the time of the Romans. Odin travels and establishes a place for his priests. Odin established his dwelling by Logrin, at the place now called Old Sigtunir, and built a large temple there and performed sacrifices according to the custom of the Æsir. He gave dwelling places to the temple priests. Njord lived at Noatun, Freyr at Uppsalir, Heimdallr at Himinbjörg, Thor at Thrudvangur, Baldur at Breidablik. He provided them all with good residences. Ynglinga Saga, Chapter 8 of Heimskringla, Finlay and Faulkes translation. Njord married a woman called Skadi. She would not have relations with him, and later married Odin. In order to provide more information about the marriage of Skadi and Njord, we're going to leave Ynglinga Saga here for a moment and jump over to the Prose Edda. So beginning in Gylfaginning, and this was a passage we read in the Skadi episode, but it is one of the primary attestations, so I'm going to reread it here. Gylfaginning, Chapter 23 and 24, Prose Edda, Brodeur translation. Of Njord and Skadi. The third among the Æsir was he that is called Njord. He dwells in heaven, in the abode called Noatun. He rules the course of the wind and stills sea and fire. On him shall men call for voyages and for hunting. He is so prosperous and abounding in wealth that he may give them great plenty of lands or of gear, and him shall men invoke for such things. Njord is not of the race of the Æsir. He was reared in the land of the Vanir, but the Vanir delivered him as hostage to the gods, and took for hostage in exchange him that men call Honir. He became an atonement between the gods and the Vanir. Njord has to wife the woman called Skadi, daughter of Thiazi the giant. Skadi would fain dwell in the abode which her father had had, which is on certain mountains in the place called Thrymheim. But Njord would be near the sea. They made a compact on these terms. they should be 9 nights in Thrymheim, but the second 9 at Noatun. But when Njord came down from the mountain back to Noatun, he sang this lay. Loath were the hills to me, I was not long in them, nights only 9. To me the wailing of wolves seemed ill after the song of swans. Then Skadi sang this. Sleep could I never on the sea beds for the wailing of waterfowl. He wakens me, who comes from the deep, the sea mew every morn. Then Skadi went up to the mountain and dwelt in Thrymheim. And she goes for the more part on snowshoes, and with a bow and arrows and shoots beasts. She is called Snowshoe Goddess, or Lady of the Snowshoes. So it is said, Thrymheim it is called where Thiazi dwelt. He the hideous giant, but now Skadi abides, pure bride of the gods, in her father's ancient freehold. Chapter 24. Njord in Noatun begot afterward 2 children. The son was called Freyr, and the daughter Freya. They were fair of face and mighty. I discussed more fully the parentage of Freyr and Freya in the Skadi episode, so I won't repeat that content here. We will skip instead to Skáldskaparmál, chapter 3 of the Prose Edda, Brodeur translation. And this is the account in which Thiazi is killed and Skadi comes to take revenge. You can go and listen to the full thing in the Skadi episode, and we'll just repeat the small section of choosing Njord as husband. Now Skadi, the daughter of the giant Thiazi, took helm and byrnie and all weapons of war and proceeded to Asgard to avenge her father. The Aesir, however, offered her reconciliation and atonement. The first article was that she should choose for herself a husband from among the Aesir, and choose by the feet only, seeing no more of him. Then she saw the feet of one man passing fair, and said, I choose this one. In Baldr little can below thee. But that was Njord of Noatun. And now we jump back to Ynglinga Saga, chapter 9 of Heimskringla, Finlay and Faulkes translation, for the death of Odin and the appointing of Njord as ruler. Odin died of sickness in Svithjord. Njord of Noatun then became the ruler over the Sviar and maintained the worship. The Sviar then called him their lord. He received tribute payments from them. In his day very good peace prevailed, and all kinds of such good harvest, that the Sviar believed that Njord had power over the harvest and the prosperity of men. In his day most of the gods died and were all burned, and afterwards worshipped. Njord died of sickness. He also had himself marked for Odin before he died. The Sviar burned him and wept bitterly over his grave. A few things in this passage to mention are Svithjord and Sviar as reference to Sweden and the Swedish, and the marking for Odin, typically thought to be believed as a piercing of the spear to dedicate the body to Odin in the afterlife. We also have the elevation of the euhemerized men to the status of godhood. And I think the most interesting part of this passage is that there was peace in the time when Njord was ruler, and that the people believed that Njord had power over the harvest and of prosperity. In this, we don't necessarily have the associations that we see with the sea, typically associated with Njord, but rather that of good harvests and prosperity, more typically thought of as Vanir qualities nowadays. We'll now jump to the Poetic Edda, Vafthrudnismal stanzas 38 through 39. And Vafthrudnismal is an account in which the god Odin, disguised as Gangenrath, faces off with the famously wise Jotun Vafthrudnir in one of his classic challenges of knowledge or battles of wit. So starting with stanza 38. Odin spake, "Tenth, answer me now, if thou knowest all, the fate that is fixed for the gods. Whence came up Njorð? To the kin of the gods, rich in temples and shrines he rules, though of the gods he was never begot." Vafthrudnir spake, "In the home of the Wanis, the Vanir, did the wise ones create him, and give him as pledge to the gods. At the fall of the world shall he fare once more home to the Wanis so wise." Now, this last line seems to state that at the fall of the world, Njord will survive and return to the land of the Vanir. Something that I thought was particularly interesting. The next passage comes from Grimnismal, stanza 16 of the Poetic Edda Bellows translation. In the last Skadi episode, I believe I got Vafthrudnir, or Vafthrudnismal and Grimnismal mixed up a little bit. So the story of Grimnismal is actually one in which Odin and Frigg have this competition between their foster sons, and then Odin goes to prove himself right, ends up being captured by his own foster son and tortured next to a fire, and then Odin proceeds to give an exposition of knowledge. So that is what is happening in Grimnismal, not the competition of knowledge that occurs in Vafthrudnismal. So, Grimnismal, stanza 16. The 11th is Noatun. There has Njord for himself a dwelling set. The sinless ruler of men there sits in his temple timbered high. And then in stanza 43, we have another mention of Njord. In days of old did Ivaldi's sons Skithbladnir fashion fair, the best of ships, for the bright god Freyr, the noble son of Njord. These next two passages definitely overlap in content. The first one comes from Skirnismal's intro in the Poetic Edda. I'll just read the one little sentence because I read the thing in full or talked about it more in the Skadi episode, but Njord bade him ask speech of Freyr. We'll move on to the next one. Gylfaginning 37 of the Prose Brodeur translation. I will actually go into the full content on this, like a little bit more of the story in the introduction, because I think it's a good story of how Freyr's bummed out about some stuff and Njord tries to be a good dad about it. A certain man was called Gymir, and his wife, Arbora. She was of the stock of the hill giants. Their daughter was Gerður, who was fairest of all women. It chanced one day that Freyr had gone to Hlidskjolf and gazed over all the world. But when he looked into the northern region, he saw on an estate a house great and fair, and toward this house went a woman. When she raised her hands and opened the door before her, brightness gleamed from her hands, both over sky and sea, and all the worlds were illumined of her. Thus his overweening pride in having presumed to sit in that holy seat was avenged upon him. that he went away full of sorrow. When he had come home, he spake not, he slept not, he drank not, no man dared speak to him. Then Njord summoned to him Skirnir, Freyr's foot-page, and bade him go to Freyr, and beg speech of him, and ask for whose sake he was so bitter, that he would not speak with men. I will save the rest of this story for an episode dedicated to Freyr, but I thought it was nice that Njord at least noticed that his son was bummed out and tried to do something about it. Skirnismal 38 and 39 of the Poetic Edda have mentions referring to Freyr as the son of Njord, so I'll just read those very quickly before we move on. How soon thou wilt with the mighty son of Njord a meeting make, and nine nights hence to the son of Njord will Gerd there grant delight. Our next passage comes from Lokasenna, stanzas 32 through 36 of the Poetic Edda Bellows translation, in which Njord defends Freya's right to have multiple lovers. Loki spake, "Be silent, Freya, thou foulest witch, and steeped full sore in sin. In the arms of thy brother the bright gods caught thee, when Freya her wind set free." Njord spake, "Small ill does it work, though a woman may have a lord, or a lover, or both. But a wonder it is that this womanish god comes hither, though babes he is born." Loki spake, "Be silent, Njord. Thou wast eastward sent to the gods as a hostage given, and the daughters of Hymir their privy had, when use did they make of thy mouth." Njord spake, "Great was my gain, though long was I gone to the gods as a hostage given. The son did I have whom no man hates, and foremost of gods is found." Loki spake, "Give heed now, Njord, nor boast too high, no longer hold it hid. With thy sister hadst thou so fair a son, thus hadst thou no worse a hope." Now, if you didn't quite pick up on some of the content, I would recommend reading the Larrington or Crawford translation for a little more literal approach, but I really like the flow of the language in the Bellows translation. Next, we have a small mention in Thrymskvida, stanza 22 of the Poetic Edda Bellows translation, in which Thor is disguised as Freya to get his hammer back. 22. Then loud spake Thrym, the giants' leader, "Bestir, ye giants, put straw on the benches. Now Freya they bring to be my bride, the daughter of Njord, out of Noatun." Next we have an interesting mention of Njord's 9 daughters. And this comes from Solaraljóð, stanza 79 of the Poetic Edda Bellows translation. "Here are runes which have engraven Njord's daughters 9, Radvor the eldest, and the youngest Krepvor, and their 7 sisters." It may be worth mentioning here that Aegir, Jotun god of the sea, is also said to have 9 daughters, and I will leave it at that. Up next, we have several passages from Skáldskaparmál in the Prose Edda. The loose outline is the Asir have a feast and Aegir comes to feast with them. There's a bunch of kennings described, and then I believe it's 3 months later, Aegir has a feast. The Aesir come to visit him, and there's a bunch more kennings. Skáldskaparmál, Chapter 1, Prose Edda, Brodeur translation. Then the Aesir came in to their banquet, and in the high seats sat them down those 12 Aesir who were appointed to be judges. These were their names: Thor, Njord, Freyr, Tyr, Heimdallr, Bragi, Vidar, Vali, Ullr, Honir, Forseti, Loki. And in like manner the Asyniur, Frigg, Freya, Gefjun, Idun, Gerður, Sigyn, Fulla, Nanna. It is interesting to me that a good number of those counted among the Aesir and Asyniur are either fully from a different tribe or half so, be that Jotun or Vanir. Moving on to chapter 13 and 14 of Skáldskaparmál, which is chapter 6 in the Larrington translation, if you're following along there, of the Prose Edda. We have kennings for Njord. How should one paraphrase Njord? By calling him God of the Vanir, or kinsman of the Vanir, or Wane, father of Freyr and Freya, God of wealth bestowal. So says Þórður Sjáriksson. Gudrun's self by ill her sons did kill. The wise god-bride at the Wane's side grieved. Men tell Odin tamed steeds well. 'Twas not the saying Hamdir spared sword-playing. Here it is recorded that Skadi departed from Njord, as has already been written. So the quick breakdown of this passage, because it was a little bit confusing when I read it at first, is they are quoting another poet, Brodeur, and the first part is Gudrun, who was the wife of Sigurd the Volsung, see Volsunga Saga. So Gudrun's self by ill her sons did kill. Gudrun killed her own sons. Next topic, the wise god bride, which would be Skadi, at the Wane's side grieved. So at Njord's side grieved. Next topic, men tell Odin tamed steeds well. Fairly obvious. And then next topic, 'twas not the saying Hamdir spared sword playing. So Hamdir did not fight with swords a little, he fought with swords quite a bit. Chapter 14, Skáldskaparmál. How should one paraphrase Freyr? Thus by calling him son of Njord. I'll go ahead and skip a little bit, moving on to, for that, Grjótrbjörn. In goods and gear, Freyr and Njorður have fairly blessed. Skipping ahead again, Ivaldi's offspring in ancient days went to shape Skidbladnir, foremost of ships, fairly for Freyr, choicely for Njord's child. Skáldskaparmál chapter 20, 28, 20 in the Larrington translation. Under kennings for Freya, we have, how should one paraphrase Freya? Thus by calling her daughter of Njord. Then we have Skáldskaparmál 41 or 33 in the Larrington translation. Aegir went to Asgard to a feast, but when he was ready to return home, he invited Odin and all the Aesir to visit him in 3 months' time. First came Odin
Njord, Freyr, Tyr, Bragi, Vidar, Loki. Likewise the Asinjur, Frigg, Freya, Gefjun, Skadi, Idun, Sif. And then they all get to chatting, and we have more poetry and kennings described. So Skáldskaparmál chapter 44, 37 in the Larrington translation of the Prose Edda. This is the Brodeur translation, again, because I haven't said that in a while. This one is an absolutely beautiful chapter full of different kennings for gold, inspired by Freya and Freya's daughter Nos, which usually translates to treasure. So I'm going to read a little bit more of this, even though it's not directly talking about Njord. I think it's kind of all in the family. It's Njord's daughter and Njord's granddaughter. So I'll go ahead and read some of these. Many a fearless swordsman received the tears of Freya. Where mounted twixt the carvings the tear of Mardol layeth. I reign of others' bedmate. Horn's child, the glorious adornment I own, gold wound, a jewel most fair to the shield's rim, fast is the golden sea flame. On the gem, Freyr's niece, the tear drift of the forehead of her mother she bears. And also thus, a defence of songs full goodly he freely gave me, neighbour of sea scales. I praise gladly Njord's daughter's gold gem child. Here she is called daughter of Njord. So I picked a few of those choice kennings out of chapter 44, all of them being different ways to refer to gold and treasure by referring to Nos, translated as treasure, the daughter of Freya, Freya's I reign, tears of gold. And that last one is fun because it follows multiple generations. I praise gladly Njord's daughter's golden gem child. In a lot of these passages, it's difficult to look at a deity or a character in isolation because they're often inspired by both their surroundings and situations as well as their family and their heritage and lineage. So I think by learning a little bit about Njord's children and even grandchildren, we can pick up on a little more of Njord's character. For our very last attestation today, we are back in Heimskringla, the Finlay and Faulkes translation. This is the Saga of Hakon the Good, or Hakonr Saga Goda. This passage comes from chapter 14, a section in which it is describing a ritual feast and the toasts given by the chieftain. First would be Odin's toast. That was drunk to victory and to the power of the king. And then Njord's toast and Freyr's toast for prosperity and peace. Then after that it was common for many people to drink the bragafol, chieftain's toast. People also drank toasts to their kinsmen, those who had been buried in mounds, and these were called mini, memorial toasts. So if you have now with you any coffee or tea, water or mead, go ahead and drink a toast to Njord for prosperity and for peace. If you liked this episode and would like to give the show a review, I would greatly appreciate it. Definitely stick around next time as we dive into the lore of Ægir and Ran. Thank you all for joining me today, and may peace and prosperity follow you wherever you go.